Yo, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back. It is a brand new episode of Bets and Banter, and you know that it's a Friday night, so we could only be talking about one thing. We're talking about Saturday. We're talking about the UFC, and it's going down in Louisville, Kentucky. We're excited to watch it go down. We got a special guest for you this week. Bets and Banter, you know we can't go it alone. We got to bring somebody along for the ride. And this week, we got a friend of the show, a old school friend of the show. If you guys have been rocking with the channel for a long time, you know exactly who Wizz Bets is. But if not, you're in for a treat. My brother from another. Welcome back to the show. How are you, my man?
Let's go. Let's fucking go. I'm good, man. How are you doing? Thanks for having me on.
My man, I'm doing wonderfully. I got my training in today. I got some team dinner in today, so I'm feeling great, man. I'm fueled up, and we've got 14 fights to break down. That's a lot of action to get to, so we won't dilly-dally. We'll get right into the first fight, but my man, we got so much great action to talk about. This is one where I could tell you, I think this is a highly volatile fight, and I'll give you my reason for why. You know, we've got this first fight of the night, and it's going down in the women's strawweight division, 115 pounds. You've got on the one side, Pooja Tomar, who I just was doing tape on before we got on the air. Wanted to make sure I had a little bit more of an opinion. Do I have a strong opinion? No, still I don't have a strong opinion after watching tape. And the reason being is Rayanne Amanda, for me, is one of these fighters that's kind of hard to get a cap on. The thing that's interesting, you know, she goes to decision with Denise Gomes, who we know has proven power. So that for me is like, okay, you know, she's not a complete flake. She's not somebody who's just going to quit on herself. You know, she's not somebody that's easy to finish or put away. But what I also am thinking about, you know, when I'm looking at this matchup is Rayanne Amanda. She's competed at all these different weight classes, right? 125, 100 and, 15 pounds, and then 105 as well, atom weight. So both of these women maybe a little bit undersized. So what I'm looking at is if I've got, you know, these two undersized women, you know, what's interesting is Rayanne Amanda, her record in this weight class is actually poor. It's like 4-6 overall as a professional. She's not batting 500 in this strawweight division. You could attribute some of that to maybe those are the stronger competitors she's faced, the better competitors she's faced. But I also think, you know, maybe it's just suboptimal for her to fight at this weight class. Now, Pooja Tomar, she's not a huge woman, right? It looks like she has a tiny bit of body fat that she could still potentially lose from her frame. You know, so if there was a 105-pound division, maybe both these women would make that cut down. I think that's reasonable to expect. But when you're looking at Pooja Tomar, what she brings to the table on the feet is a lot of aggression. She's got several wins by knockout. I don't think she's the cleanest striker you've ever seen. But in women's MMA, we always talk about there's not many standing knockouts. So a lot of times what you're relying on in the striking department is volume. Girls that are going to go out there and commit to throwing, girls that can go out there and put a lot of offense out. And so, like, the basics of this matchup for me is like, on the one hand, you have to favor Rayanne Amanda. Why? She's a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt. She's been doing, you know, martial arts her entire life. And then Pooja Tomar, on the other hand, is the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu blue belt. Right there, you could stop the conversation and just say, okay, on the ground, the pedigree is a little bit different. The level of class, the level of experience, a little bit different. However, I've seen Pooja Tomar in some arm bars in some tight situations that I was just watching. She's not giving up on the first sign of adversity, right? I think you're going to have to either break her arm, put her to sleep. You're going to have to put her in a really tight situation, I feel. Now, the path for Rayanne Amanda that's gotten cracked on the prop market that I looked at is the KO. You know, I always think about looking for contrarian angles. Women's fights to end by KO is one of them, you know, and in this spot, I always talk about as a fundamental in my program, if you think somebody has the positional dominance to go out there and submit somebody, well, then surely they have the positional dominance to potentially get a ground and pound TKO. That's something I've exploited in the past. I do like to get over 10-1 on these grapplers to win via TKO typically. But when I'm looking at this spot, I say to myself, you know, at 9.5-1, something like that, maybe that's a way to get involved if you like the Rayanne Amanda side or the finish markets, the ITD, the not to go to the distance. I think that's her path to looking like a big favorite here. She gets her grappling off and she wins the fight. But I think on the other side, if this is a stand-up kickboxing match for 15 minutes, I think Pooja Tomar at plus 280 is going to look like the bet of the card because I think she's going to get in her face. I think she's going to throw all night. I was not convinced by the cardio last time out from Rayanne Amanda. I wasn't convinced by the finishing instincts or the aggression. She seems like a girl who's kind of content, you know, to just let things play out in front of her and not a prolific finisher against quality competition. So this is the opportunity for her to go out there and look good against an opponent that's not as seasoned on the mat. But I think Puja Tomar is kind of a firecracker, and I think she's going to try and defend takedowns like hell. I think she's going to try and circle around the octagon, be elusive. She throws a lot of leg kicks. And if she gets off on the leg kicks early, you lose a lot of power and drive on your takedowns. And I just don't think of Ryan Amanda as very physical as a grappler. So for me, those are my criticisms of a big -3XX favorite, acknowledging she has to be favored here for pedigree alone. But my man, I think this betting line is a little bit off. I think money line or pass, it's the dog here for me personally. How about you, brother?
Yeah. At the current line, I mean, you gotta think towards the Tomar side. Tomar, like in the stand-up, she's looked pretty clean in her fights, given that she's really fighting out of a lower tier regional scene and not against the best competition. I'm trying to think like of the equivalent of janitors, but for WMMA, and the word's not coming into my head, but you guys get what I mean. She hasn't fought the cream of the crop. Neither has Ryan Amanda, but she has a fight in UFC. She's also fought on the Contender series against Denise Gomez and took Denise Gomez to a decision. And we all know Denise Gomez is a tough girl. Personally, I think Hayani got robbed in her last fight. Close fight, nonetheless. I mean, you can't really be too confident on either side, but I do think she got robbed in that last one against Talita. And man, Puja just seems like she's going to give up takedowns left and right with just her stance. And that's where I think it's going to go bad for her here. I think Amanda is going to be able to hold position, maybe not in round one when energy levels are at a high, but as the fight goes on, round two, round three, if it doesn't finish by then, I just see her drowning Puja with the grappling. I wouldn't lay the -3XX on her, but I luckily caught the opener. I rarely ever catch openers, but I caught -180 on Hayani Amanda, and I parlayed her at -220. But I wouldn't touch her at current lines.
You know, I think obviously, number one, you did your job based on the market movement here. I think the tipping point for me would probably be like that -250 range. I think anything above that's probably a little bit too far. But I think that in terms of where you got in, I don't hate the bet. And when you're looking at women's MMA, what's the biggest edge? Grappling, typically, physicality, and experience. And I think in those categories, he's checking those boxes. But I just feel like this, could play out more competitive than the line entails. So that's my thought there. But she has a path to looking like a -500, right? So that's the upside, I think, with Ryan Amanda. For Puja Tomar, you're kind of buying into, hey, maybe this girl's made the requisite improvements now that she's a blue belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, training with better fighters. I think I forget, I think it's Bali that she's training out of now, but basically she had moved her camp from India to Bali to get with better training partners. And there are some quality fighters there, but it is, a regional level of quality. And that's something that you want to keep in the back of your mind. Ryan Amanda, her husband's a black belt that still competes competitively on the U.S. amateur circuit as well. So shout out to everybody rocking with us. We can move along to this next one, my brother. We got two bantamweights going at it. Cody, the Spartan Stamen, taking on Taylor Lapilus. And this is a fight where obviously I don't like getting involved with big favorites, but my gut lean is towards Taylor Lapilus. I feel like Cody Stamen's a very popular underdog pick this week, but I can also understand the argument for Stamen, which is if he goes out there, competes for takedowns, he's not a horrible boxer. He can compete on the feet as well. Maybe he keeps these rounds close. He's fought the better quality of competition, but I just haven't loved the career arc of Cody Stamen, so to speak. And I think that Taylor Lapilus is a guy who's hungry to get back in the UFC. And the guys he's been competing against, I think both of them would give Cody Stamen a run personally. How do you feel about this matchup, Wizz?
Yeah, this one is, at first glance, I thought this matchup was going to be a lot closer than I now think it is. Cody Stamen, we all know what he looks for. He looks for the wrestling. And, even recently, he really hasn't actually gone to the wrestling all that often. I believe it's 5 takedowns in his last 3 fights that he landed, or last 4 fights, if I remember correctly. I could be mistaken the fight amount there, but very low amount of takedowns landed compared to what he's attempting. And against a guy like Taylor Lapilus, who we saw defend takedown after takedown after takedown from Callan Loughran, who I rate, in terms of wrestling, I rate pretty highly. I would say up there in terms of the wrestlers for the division. and he couldn't take Lapalus down. And Lapalus just continued to defend and dig underhooks, and he was doing the right things. He showed that he has that defense in his back pocket. So I think he can stay safe in this matchup. But to be honest, even on the feet, I know this had that, the large reach advantage and height advantage here, but my bad on the height. I do think that Lapalus can stay out of danger, but Cody makes fights close. Even on the feet, he continues to pressure forward. The gut feeling is that this ends in a split. Have not bet it yet. I need to look at what the numbers are, but I do like the Lapalus as a pure pick. But at the current line, I just can't go with minus 260. He just seems to not have the margin for victory to where I'd be comfortable laying that price.
Totally.
I kind of rambled there for a second, but
no, I totally agree with you, brother. I think that when you look at a guy like Lapalus, he hasn't been covering these huge prices, but for me, Basharat is a really dangerous threat. I think Basharat is a very serious guy on the come up. I think Callan Loughran is tough as an old leather boot. And honestly, I think that if he had been given more time to prepare for the matchup, he would have had an even better showing than what he gave that night. If you remember that fight week, he's supposed to fight Yanis Gamori. They're like, oh, they're just giving him the layup that they gave Talbot. And now it's like, all right, on the other hand, Taylor Lapalus, guy who's already been in the UFC, who earned his way back by beating UFC level guys. It's like, yeah, brutal. That's just not easy matchmaking. So when I look at this, man, I say to myself, how do they scoop here? Because for me, there's two general narratives on this fight, which is this fight's obviously going the distance, which is my first instinct, right? Everybody's first instinct is two decisionators are going to go to decision. And then on the other hand, it's like, okay, maybe if you're getting creative, it's like Cody Stamann. Let's look at the underdog price, and I think that that's tempting. But for me, my gut instinct here is that Taylor Lapalus can win this fight via knockout. I know Cody Stamann hasn't been finished on the feet lately, but one thing I want to keep in mind is I felt like he was kind of getting clipped a little bit by Said Nurmagomedov, and then he was like, I should use my wrestling, which I never use. And then he went to shoot, and he just put his head in there, got choked. And Taylor Lapalus is a guy that finished Nate Maness, Kentucky Tough, a guy who literally got his jaw broken, was like, yeah, that's interesting, comes back out and knocks the guy silly, cashed my ticket there. I was like, salute Kentucky Tough Nate Maness. This guy's built different. He got put down by Taylor Lapalus. I think it was like a side kick to the body as well. This guy is just like a weird striker. He picks his shots, but when he throws with commitment. And I just feel like Cody Stamann's a guy who's going to want to box or wrestle. And those are two skills that'll put him in close. But a lot of times in his fights, the criticism I would have is he's just getting caught in that in-between, just looking a little bit and rolling a little bit and just not doing enough. And so he'll throw a little bit, he'll box a little bit, but he's not mixing in all these tools. And I feel like Lapalus, he's going to be trying to kick him here, and he's going to have a big cage to work with. So if he kicks him really hard at some point, I wouldn't be surprised. That's kind of my gut feeling here. Double Impact could use a knockout. His resume has been a little bit dry of them lately. And excuse me, I just think the style matchup here, he's got a guy who's not going to be able to compete with him at kicking range. So it's an interesting fight, though. And I don't hate, the Cody Stamann angle, but for me, not a dog I'm interested in this week. I wish everybody the best of luck. But with that being said, my man, let's move along to this next one. Speaking of Denise Gomes, she's back in action, my man. She's had an interesting UFC run, right? 2 first-round knockouts that were very impressive, and then 2, difficult decisions against veterans of the strawweight division. So I think that when you're looking at her trajectory, it's all upwards, right? She also had that grappling match. I don't know if you caught that. I think that was out in Vegas, and she did get tapped there. She was clearly a level below her opponent, but I like that from a trajectory standpoint. Young girl, willing to go out there and compete, outside of her comfort zone, so to speak. She can go out there and knock people out. We've learned that about her in the UFC. Yasmin Waregi, boxing prospect, gets buzzed in the first exchange by this girl, Denise Gomes. So I think of her as, a work in progress that had some losses when she was young in her career. She's still young in her career, and she's on the way up. And so I think that, she's maybe not getting the credit she deserves as a prospect here, because I think of both these women as prospects. And frankly, Eduarda Mora, who I really like, she has good skills. She's got an interesting game. I like her jiu-jitsu, but I have questions, right? Number one, failure to make weight. Not something that the UFC is typically buzzing about, right? 30-year-old prospects versus 25-year-old prospects. again, they prefer, typically speaking, the younger you are, the more shelf life you could have, the better it is for us financially. Let's do it. So if Eduardo Mora is going to, make something of her career, she's got to push it forward. I mean, it's all happened in a flash, my man. If you look at her topology, you're like, oh, she started fighting in 2021? Made a great career for herself, very quickly ascended the ranks, looked ready for primetime against Montserrat Conejo, who's not ready for primetime, with no disrespect. That's been shown multiple times, where it's not just like she's losing the fight, right? You lose the fight, that happens, right? Fighters on the rise. She's getting uncomfortably beaten in most of her fights. So it's like, this is a woman that just shouldn't be here for her own health and safety. She's just getting pummeled and assaulted by other women that are more talented and more competitive and frankly bigger. So one meme win against Cheyenne Velisma has kept her around for the length of that UFC contract, just getting assaulted by these women that know jiu-jitsu and easily can take her down and just pass the guard and beat her up. So I thought that Mora looked okay in that fight, but rewatching the tape, again, these are things I revisited right before we got on the air. She's pulling guard and just hit like a butterfly sweep again. That works against the Canejos of the division. Does that work against Denise Gomes? I don't think she's a very sophisticated ground player, but I think she's strong and physical and tenacious and not just going to like roll over for you or make mistakes that are basic in terms of hip placement and things like that. And she's got, a partner who's a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu practitioner, a black belt, competitive in the UFC level. So it's just like, she seems like she's positioned Perane Valetudo, working with, great women for a long time, building up her skill set. She just doesn't seem to me like a pushover. So I understand the narrative. Maybe she gets out grappled here, but Angela Hill, has she been showing a regression in her grappling game? No, it's been the hallmark of a career resurgence is that her grappling has improved over time to the point where she just got her first career submission. And on top of that, you look at what she's put together. She's actually doing a better job of working from the ground, showing submission attempts, showing takedown defense. So I think that there's been clear improvement in Angela Hill. The other thing is Loma Lupumbi, another example of a girl who was terrible at grappling at one point in her career. She was a pure Thai striker, and she worked with the Hickman brothers, and she worked with, high-level women on the ground until she's going out there getting submissions in the UFC. So I just think, maybe people are writing off the Gomes a little bit too early here, and maybe they're giving Mora a little bit too much credit. I had Jacqueline Amorim by KO, TKO, plus 1,600, and I thought it was rigged against me. I swear to God, I was about to cry on my kitchen floor. I thought they were going to force this fight to go over. I had the plus 1,600. I have the ITD, and she is just assaulting this woman in the mount, beating her up, holding the wrist, going for, and like she's like trying to submit her and beating her up. And I'm like, they're going to let this go. The ref is just letting her get pummeled. And eventually they were forced to intervene. It was such a bad beating. And I was like, thank goodness. They couldn't even rob it. They tried to take it away. They couldn't even do it. But when I'm looking at this one, man, I say, Mora's good. I like the violence as an angle. I think that Mora, TKO is an interesting way to look at her side. Again, what did we talk about? If you have the ability to submit, you have the positions to TKO. And honestly, I think Denise Gomes is really tough, right? I think the way you're going to get her out of there is by eventually just rolling her wrist and punching her a million times. I don't think she's going to give up otherwise. So for me, those are the kind of thoughts that I have. I think it's a competitive fight. I think it's another volatile matchup. And so that would tempt me to take the underdog, lean into the violent aspect, because I think that one girl has an advantage on the ground. But forgive me if I'm wrong. If this fight just stays on the feet, who would you favor to win the fight outright? I would favor Denise Gomes based on what we've seen so far, and pretty clearly. So if the fight stays standing again, it might not be competitive. It could look like Denise Gomes is a huge favorite. How do you feel?
I'm assuming that's the fight you mentioned you're very passionate about, because that was a really good breakdown.
No, brother. It's so funny. Okay, I'm just passionate about life.
Okay. So this matchup at first, in my head, I was like, Eduardo Mora is going to maul Denise Gomes. And thinking about it, what led me to that thought was, we've seen Denise Gomes get taken down multiple times over and over again on the regional scene. In the UFC, we've seen it. And it's not a good look going up against someone like Eduardo Mora, who primarily, her nickname is Ronda. She's looking for the judo throws. She's looking for takedowns, and she's trying to submit you, whether arm bar, rear naked choke, whatever it is. And then you dig into the tape, and man, Mora, she missed weight again. This is the second time, back-to-back weight misses here. This time not as bad as the first.
She's trying to set a record.
She's trying to set a record for the most amount of fines taken from debut to present. And the first time she missed by, I believe it's 4 pounds. And you know what? 4 pounds mean you just didn't even try. You weren't sucked out. And in that fight against Montserrat Canelo Ruiz, she was about to start gassing out if she didn't finish Montserrat in that second round because the movement started to slow down. You could start to see her like panting mid round. And sure, Montserrat was getting beat through and through. It was 2 10-8 rounds on the way to be at 2 10-8 rounds. She wasn't doing anything. But Mora was still gassing out. And in this fight, one of Denise Gomez's fights really stood out to me on the regional scene, and it was the fight against Dudieva. If I remember correctly, that's the fight where she got taken down and mauled for the first 2 rounds over and over again. And then in the third round, Dudieva gassed out real bad, and Denise Gomez got the finish. And I somehow think that's what's going to happen here too. If she's able to stay safe on the mat for a round and a half, I think this fight starts to turn into her favor. I personally wouldn't take Denise Gomez pre because for all I know, Eduardo Mora, I would not be surprised if she goes out there, takes her down in round 1, and submits her. But then if she can withstand the pressure from round 1 into that second round for the first couple of minutes, I think Denise can turn this fight around and then find a finish of her own in the third, or maybe even find a 10-8 round in that third round and steal it on the scorecard. So I would target this fight more of a live bet situation after round 1, maybe even like mid round 2. That's how I'm going to approach it personally. But yeah, I'm on the Denise Gomez side, even though at first glance I thought this was going to be Eduardo Mora all day. But minus 190 on a girl who really is not proven and hasn't really fought anyone just yet is a little wild to me. So yeah, give me Denise Gomez live spot.
Listen, like she trains with Jailton, I think she's going to have good grappling just overall. I definitely, believe in her as a potential prospect, but I'm just not ready to say Denise Gomez sucks and she's, hopeless. And, I just think it's a very competitive fight. So good stuff, my man. I appreciate your insights. And we can move along to this next one, brother, where we've got Daniel Marcos taking on John Castaneda, the sexy Mexi. And I'll tell you, brother, I don't have very strong thoughts on this one. This is not a fight that I've looked to bet so far this week. I have respect for both guys. I think Daniel Marcos, undefeated record. For my money, I'd put him at 14-1. I thought Davey Grant deserved the nod there. I'm a big Davey Grant fan, so maybe color me biased there, but I've never really been blown away by Marcos. I thought Simon Oliveira, turned out to be a pretty average guy for the UFC level. So again, it's all love and respect for these guys that go out there and compete, but it's just got to call it like we see it. And on the Castaneda side, the fight that I don't like on his record, the loss to Nathaniel Wood, who I think is typically, he's a skilled fighter, but I do think he's a little bit of a head case and a guy that you can get over on. And I especially think if you have good, powerful wrestling takedowns, you should be able to beat Nathaniel Wood. And that's one thing that concerned me, but it was a little time ago. Back in 2020, I think Nathaniel Wood was competing at an optimal weight class then, cutting a lot of weight, big guy, strong and physical. So the win over Muin Gafurov tells me nothing. I think Muin Gafurov's pretty fraudulent. Honestly, I thought he should have finished that fight. But now looking back, the Kyung Ho Kang win, that's a pretty impressive win. And I know Kyung Ho Kang is up there in age, but I rate him. I think Daniel Willie Cat Santos, I don't hold that loss against him. That's a dangerous guy. He can chin you. It is what it is. He had a lot more experience than Santos. That's the only other thing here is that I'm looking at a guy who's got a lot of professional fights in Castaneda, and most of them at a higher level than anything that Marcos has seen in his career. So it just seems to me like Castaneda was probably the side, but I missed the best of it. I know some sharp guys that ate up plus 145 and things like that. So now it's like a pick 'em price. That's kind of where I see it. How about you, brother?
Yeah, I agree with where the line is at currently at Pick'em. I would have loved to get in on Castaneda early prices at the dog prices, but I didn't really come around to taping this fight until 2 days ago or even a day ago. So I didn't really have the strongest of conviction. And then coming out of tape, I really think this is a coin flip type of fight where whoever gets their game plan going wins. If Sexy Maxi can get those takedowns and really grind and wear on Daniel Marcos, I think it's going to be a long night for Daniel. We still have questions about how he looks off of his back. We haven't really seen him off his back in his career just yet. And I would like to see those questions get answered. I wouldn't want to step in front of the fire there, because what if it turns out that, he has a pretty good bottom game or good getup? Then I'm just going to be regretting my Castaneda bet. And I know some pretty well-respected people in the community that are on Castaneda pretty largely. I can't get there. He's another one of those guys that makes fights really close, which is good if you're getting him at an underdog price, but at coin flip, it doesn't really make sense to me. And we've seen him time and time again go for takedowns, but if he keeps failing, he just abandons them completely. The Kyung Kang fight, really impressive. The knockout loss to Danielle Willicott Santos. I was sweating bullets because I was on Willicott Santos for a large sum of money, and that fight was getting very close until the knockout. But yeah, I don't blame him for that. Daniel Marcos seems like a guy who likes a pretty fight and likes to stay at range until it gets to that third round, and if his opponent's a little wilty, that's where he starts to put on the gas. But other than that, he's very content with staying at range and almost like point fighting. Those aren't fighters that I like to bet on generally, and ultimately this led me to a pass on this fight unless I can get some dog money on Sexy Mexi, like plus 140 or more. Then yeah, ultimate pass. But should be a fun fight to watch.
Yeah, man, I agree. I'm keeping my money away from this one. Just looking at my past bets, I got bailed out. I had a Richie Lang plus 240, and that was on its way to being a loser, my man. So we got bailed out on a Richie Lang. And then meanwhile, on Castaneda, when I bet on him at plus 195, things worked out well against Miles Johns. But that was more of like a system fade on Miles Johns, and just not a guy that I believed in. I think Miles Johns has gotten on a different supplement routine because his ability to continue late in fights has changed tremendously, but God bless him for it, finding ways to win. But that's the fight. It's not a fight I care tremendously about, and I wish you the best of luck if you're on that one, on either side. Next up, my man, we got Andrea KGB Lee taking on Montana De La Rosa. I'm stunned by the amount of people that want to bet on this fight, but I always respect. I'm never one that says like, "Oh, this fight is." If you're betting on this, bet on whatever damn fight you think you have. Dude, I always say bet on whatever fight you think you got an edge on. Because oftentimes the fights where people don't want to bet them are where you can find an edge, or the ones where everybody's rushing to the same play. Those kind of things. But I feel like in this spot, I've heard people make a case for both sides. I think both of them have regressed over the course of their career, just in terms of like their performances, right? They're not winning at a very high clip. They're both pretty middle of the road type fighters. And the last time they fought was a long time ago. We see rematches change results all the time, but it's not like Montana De La Rosa has been trending up and, Lee's been trending down. It's like Lee's been fighting good girls in the division pretty competitively, and Montana De La Rosa has done a little bit of that, but she's also done that with girls at the lower end of the division. She's kind of just like in the same fight with everybody. I'm going to try and take you down, or against JJ Aldrich, I'm not, right? But like most of the time, I'm going to try and take you down. I'm just going to grab a hold of you, try and clinch a little bit. If you're more physical than me, might not work out. I feel like in this fight, it's not a fight I have a big edge on. I don't like betting on either of these women's fights. I think that I had some Suarez. Let me actually see what I had. I definitely bet Tatiana Suarez in some capacity for that fight. And, she pulled off the guillotine, part of the biggest power couple in all of MMA right now, Patchy Mix and Tatiana Suarez, if she could stay healthy, championship trajectories. But overall, man, this is not a fight I feel bullish on. Looking back at my past results, I did well on that Suarez. Oh, I had Suarez by submission. Okay, I didn't want to claim it unless I made sure I had it. I did well betting the props on Montana De La Rosa fights on money lines. I did terrible. I had Montana against Macy Barber. What a horrific bet. She got beat like she owed her money. I had Viviane Araújo at chalk. So rare chalk bet for me in WMMA. I have been looking to mostly fade these women. And then I had Andrea Lee at plus money against Cynthia Calvillo, which is a comical line in hindsight, like two women that both were on that downward trajectory. So in terms of trying to project out how this fight could go differently, the only thing I could see, man, is just betting fight not to go the distance at a huge plus money number and hoping that one of these women is so checked out on their career that they just quit or give up. Because otherwise, I don't even know how I'd play this. How about you, my man?
You know, I hate to say it, but I barely taped this fight. I watched 2 fights from each girl, their last 2. I couldn't. I couldn't put myself through through the pain. On one hand, you have a grappler in Montana De La Rosa who's going to look for the wrestling more often than not. On the feet, we've seen her struggle time and time again. And if this fight stays standing, I think it's in Andrea Lee's world, and I think it's her fight to lose. But if Montana is able to land those takedowns, which we have seen a lot of girls land multiple takedowns, Macy Barber on Andrea Lee time and time again, and hold her in position. So it's another one of those fights where whoever gets their game plan going first wins. And I just don't want to go anywhere near it, especially Andrea Lee at Drew's. Like, the only way I can look at it is dog or pass with Montana De La Rosa. And for the sole fact that I tend to favor the wrestlers and grapplers over strikers. And that's primarily because if you're winning minutes in the grappling and wrestling, you're more bound to win a decision. And if you can win a decision, I'm cool with that. I'll favor those fighters more often than not. It just gives you more of a security blanket in a fight that's favored to go to the distance more often than not. I believe it's like minus 350, minus 400 to hit the cards. I'll want the fighter that can win more minutes. Andrea Lee can definitely win moments on the feet, but if she keeps getting taken down, it's Montana's world there. So give me Montana, but zero confidence.
Yeah, it's funny. I think that we've seen an improvement in the wrestling of Andrea Lee, even though she gives up takedowns from time to time. The one difference I would say between these two women from the last time they fought is just looking at the stat line. She's been getting a lot more takedowns. 2 takedowns against Miranda Maverick, 5 takedowns against Macy Barber, although she did get taken down as well in that fight and outlanded. She got outlanded by Miranda Maverick. But then you look, she also took down Antonina Shevchenko 3 times. She took down the very strong Viviane Araújo 1 time in a loss and outlanded her on significant strikes. So she's kind of gotten more aggressive with her takedown. She even took down Roxanne Modafferi 3 times and outlanded her in a loss as well. So oftentimes she's like done what on paper is enough to win these fights and just loses anyway. So that's an interesting thing to note, but maybe she mixes in a couple takedowns here as well, because Montana De La Rosa, she kind of got bully balled by Macy Barber and just like mugged in the clinch. And even though she's 35, like if she is on any kind of sauce, I feel like we could definitely see Andrea Lee just like horse her around a little bit. She looks to be the more physical of these two. So I don't feel bullish about anything here. Next up, my man, speaking of passion, I got to defend myself from my own commenters. All right, brother, because I had some people in my comment section on my first look this week, and they're saying, in fact, I don't want to speak out of turn, brother. I do not want to speak out of turn. If I'm going to talk about somebody on the show, I'm going to quote them fairly. So let's see here, my man. He said this, Jeremy the Bot, which I think is an ironic and interesting name. But in any case, Jeremy the Bot comments, I wouldn't take Brad Katona minus 600 against any fighter in the UFC. He puts in quotes, attributing it to me. He says, really? No one, huh? That is probably why you don't win. Cope. The influencers are doing the trendy thing of blindly saying that every massive favorite is overvalued because of some petty criticism. Meanwhile, the line has moved to minus 700. Take the hint. Here's what I'm going to tell you, my brother. I'll be wrong many times on this show, and I could be wrong on this one as well. I'm just owning that fact. I don't hide from that fact. But you can go look at the record, which is posted in the description of every video I post on this channel. You could look in the replies in the comments, which I provided very ably to you as well. My betmma.tips, where I post all these bets that I talk about on the show. And you can go look for yourself at the fact that my most profitable category on moneyline bets is big underdogs, because I have the nerve and the willingness to stick my neck out there and say, I think this person can win. I believe this line is mispriced. And sometimes I'm wrong. I don't have to get it right every time when you're betting on big plus money. That's the name of the game. That's mathematics. So for me, what I'm always going to do is look for long-term edges. What I want to do right now is very briefly discuss some of the reasons why I personally wouldn't lay Brad Katona minus 700 against any bantamweight in the UFC. Number one, it's a very competitive division. So the idea of me laying a minus 700 at bantamweight is almost never going to happen, right? Like I can't think of a scenario where it would happen. Even when I think there's a massive edge, it's normally like minus 225, Minus 400 is where I cap out like the absolute max. If I think somebody is really, really way better than somebody, that's basically where I'm capping it out. I think the only time I played a money line off the top of my head that was larger than that ever in mixed martial arts than minus 500 or something, minus 400 on Shavkat is one I remember. But I think I played Kevin Holland minus 700 against Charlie Ontiveros. And if you remember that fight, man, he grabbed a hold of him, picked him up, threw him to the ground, and broke his arm. And like Charlie like got carried out after. And I don't mean that in any disrespectful way. It was actually a scary scene, but like it was a lightweight against a guy who fights at middleweight. Like I was just like, okay, this one is just like not, this shouldn't have been sanctioned. This is scary. And I just thought Kevin, who's got a brick for a head, the one way that Ontiveros wins that fight is if he clips somebody who's literally one of the most durable guys you've seen in the history of the UFC. And you could go back and look. Kevin has like folded up the shop sometime and realized like, hey, my hand's broke or whatever. But if you just look at the shots he takes to his chin and does not go unconscious or sleep, it's kind of unbelievable. But in any case, my man, back to this fight. Brad Katona, I'll tell you, when he was the biggest favorite price he ever was in the UFC, and most people won't know this, but I check my facts, right? The biggest favorite price you ever laid on Brad Katona in the Ultimate Fighting Championship was minus 255 against Jay Cuccinelli. And most of you guys are saying to yourself, who the fuck is Jay Cuccinelli? Because Jay Cuccinelli hasn't fought in the UFC in an eternity, okay? So when you look at how this fight lays out on paper, you have a guy in Brad Katona who's clearly a skill, pedigree above, right? He's fought at a high level. He's been around for a long time. Does he separate in his fights? The answer is no, based on the statistics, right? You don't have to trust me. You go look at the numbers. He's being statistically outlanded over a large sample size in the UFC. He has a negative striking differential. Is he a guy who goes out there and grapples his way to victory? You would ask yourself. Well, I can tell you where he's recorded 3 or more takedowns, he is 1-3 in those fights. Or excuse me, 1-2 in those fights, meaning he won one of those fights, he lost 2 of those fights. So when he's going out there and getting multiple takedowns like he did last fight, he's still not winning the fight on average. So then I look at the other side here, okay? Jesse Butler. Am I thinking Jesse Butler is the next UFC champion? Maybe he's not, right? He's just an average guy. But I'm looking at Jesse Butler and saying to myself, is he a guy who's proven he can finish? Yeah. He's knocked people dead unconscious with punches on the feet. Okay. Has he proven that he could go out there and submit people? He had a black belt on his back. He then gets out, maneuvers behind his opponent, and submits him with a rear naked choke. So he reversed position and then submitted a black belt while he was a purple belt. And before the fight, he said, I'm going to submit him. And then he did it after the guy had his back. So when he faces some adversity, when he's in a bad position, he doesn't just quit. That's important to me when I'm looking at an underdog. Okay. Then he fights Jim Miller. Okay. By the way, and this is a question I want everybody to answer in the comments down below, if you don't mind. Who would you favor in a fight right now if they were to fight in the UFC? Jim Miller or Brad Katona? And for me, brother, it ain't a hard question. I think Jim Miller would splatter him like a bug on the windshield. And I don't mean that to be disrespectful to Brad, but he's a smaller guy. And Jim Miller is the most experienced guy in the history of the UFC. Do you know what he closed in that fight against Jim Miller? Plus 220, my brother. Jesse Butler was plus 220 against Jim A10 Miller, who I think would splatter Brad Katona like a bug on the windshield. So if that's the case, why is he plus 500 against Brad Katona? And if somebody could give me that answer, then I that's all I want to know is the answer to that question. Why is he plus 220 against Jim Miller, who is capable of winning fights by knockout, capable of winning fights by decision, capable of winning fights by submission? He's a black belt with the most experience in UFC history, and he had knocked out Moda, and he's knocking out guys that are young. He splattered this guy who is a career featherweight in his first fight. Did the guy say, I'm getting right back in there? Ego, get me right back in there. No, he had a couple fights booked. He realized, hey, I can make 135. I can be big. I can go out there and try and give myself a competitive advantage where on the regional scene for $1,000, it's not worth it to cut all the weight out of your body and really suffer, right? It's not worth it for $1,000, but it might be worth it for 12 and 12 and the opportunity to keep your UFC dream alive. So who is going to be the hungry, motivated party here? The guy who's fat and happy and just already got back to the UFC. And by the way, he's coming off a loss in his hometown. Like, where was the motivation there? Where was the great performance there where you should have had it? It wasn't there. And then Jesse Butler, meanwhile, is probably fighting for his job and career. And the guy works very hard. And the guy's working with Nick Piccinini, a New York wrestling legend, and a guy who wrestled for national, medals at Oklahoma State. He's wrestling with that guy. He's wrestling with Jack Mueller. He's putting himself in uncomfortable situations. He's working out with all the guys at Fortis. Is he trying to lose this fight? Did he cut off his leg? Is he an idiot? Or I just feel like everybody's disrespecting this man because he got folded like a lawn chair by Jim Miller. But the facts are, I think Jim Miller would do the exact same thing to Brad Katona. So let's find out. I think the line is completely insane, and we'll just have to live to find out the results. How about you, brother?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of things that I want to bring up with this fight. Jesse Butler, as you mentioned, this is not his weight class. This guy is a guy who fought at featherweight and has fought at lightweight for most of his career, and he's dropping down to bantamweight now. And I can only imagine what that does to his chin. Sure, he got folded at 155 against one of the most experienced guy in the UFC history. I don't think it's going to do him any favors moving down to 135. He is going to have a huge reach advantage here and height advantage against Brad Katona. And the one thing that I think plays to Butler's disadvantage is if he wants to really go ahead in this fight, he's going to have to keep that range in my opinion, and then not let Brad Katona do what Brad Katona does, which is crash pocket, punch on the inside, cage push, and then go for more takedowns. I don't really think Brad should go for many takedowns here just because of how good Jesse Butler is off his back, and his submission game is legit. I wouldn't want to take him down until he gasses out, if that happens, which I do foresee happening moving down to 135 now. But until that does happen, if it does, I would just want to keep crashing the pocket and moving forward. I think this line is absolutely nuts too. Minus 700 is pretty crazy. I did that Butler got folded in that first round, but does he have a pulse? Yeah. Does he still train martial arts at a high level professionally? Yes. And then is Brad Katona really Superman, or is it just his nickname? At this point, I think mine is blown up to a point where I have to take Jesse Butler. Early on, I will fully admit I parlayed the Katona, and that's who I parlayed the Amanda minus 220 leg with at the minus 430 number, I think, because I was willing to risk a minus 430 here because I do think Katona could win a decision more often than Butler does, and that's where I think this fight heads to. But in terms of what it is at right now, I don't agree. So I'll probably have a small hedge if Hayani wins, just to cover my ass. But yeah, line is ridiculous right now.
Yeah, man, it's like I respect the people on Katona. They're thinking like, hey, he's just getting a layup, last chance to fade Jesse Butler. But it's just like, number one, it's against my long-term fundamentals, the prices. And then number two, I just can't rationalize it. Like you brought up the point that I kind of left off the table, which is the size. Like I mentioned that he's going to be bigger. He's a career featherweight, but like we didn't talk about the fact that this is the biggest opponent Katona's ever fought in the UFC, not by a small margin, by a big margin. It's the longest guy he's ever fought in terms of length. Like he is the biggest guy he's ever fought. So yeah, Brad Katona's done well against some guys that have, reach advantages. Everybody has a reach advantage against him, but most of the time it's 4 inches. Now it's 9. It's like the guy can punch him from halfway across the octagon. So it just seems to me like, Butler is being priced like he's a dead body. And I just don't see it, man. I think he's going to go out there and compete. So I think it should be a fun scrap. I think that the fact that he opened up a bigger dog against Brad Katona than he did against Sean Woodson and Jim Miller, it just doesn't sit right with me. So let's find out. Next up, brother, we've got Charles Radke taking on Carlos Prates. Wizz, why don't you start us off, my man?
Man, this is one of my favorite fights on the card. I do have a on this fight yet. I've been looking at this fight for quite some time, and early on, I've been preaching that I'm going to be on the Radke side. Even though Prates is a guy that I've been a huge fan of, following him from his days in the LFA, and his striking is very fluid and almost, I'm not going to say similar to Poatan, but he sets everything up, and he is very stiff with his movements. So he reminds me of the way Alex Pereira moves just slightly. And what you're getting with Prates is a guy that can set up combinations, will land head kicks, A stunning knee. Everything striking on the Pratis side. It just put together pretty well. You look at the combinations that this guy is throwing, and he's setting up against anyone and everyone after he's been taken down and mauled for minutes on minutes, similar to how he was against Trevin Giles, where he was arguably on his way to lose the fight, then lands that straight down the pipe, changes the trajectory and knocks him out. But Radke is a guy who likes to make fights dirty. He's going to cage push. He's going to go for wrestling. He's going to go for these
and post-fight interviews, dude. He likes to make everything dirty if he can.
Yeah. That's I was trying to leave that part out to keep the show a little more PG, but you know, since you brought it up.
Well, I just flipped off somebody as well. So, you know, we're just leaning into it today. It's an edgy late night version of Bets and Banter. I hope you guys are digging it.
Yeah, Radke likes to be involved in there. If he's able to get his game going early, I think it's going to be trouble for Pratis, because I'm not saying Radke has the best wrestling in the world. We saw his performance against Blood Diamond. We didn't forget. That was horrible. He almost got knocked out by Blood Diamond. And that's what's giving me some pause. I know it was one performance, it was one fight, and he did fight pretty well in his last one. They keep pricing this guy at near plus 2xx, and I think the books are wrong again. I think the line should be a little bit closer, maybe a Pratis minus 160, 170, in my opinion, which is not too far off from where the line is currently at, closer to minus 230, 220. But I think Pratis is going to be losing this fight until he eventually lands a knockout. Good get-ups, is able to stay on his feet. At least first layer of takedown defense, at least on the regional, was pretty decent. He could have had UFC jitters in that first fight against Trevin Officer Giles. And from there, I just think that Pratis is going to be able to, at some point, land that knockout blow. Probably another straight on the pipe, too, and shut Radke's lights off. So I'm going to try and find an angle for fight ends in KO. I've seen like minus 110s and minus 120s laid somewhere out there. And I think both guys can win via knockout here. That's probably more along the lines of what I'm looking at instead of a Radke money line poke, because I do think his lights can get shut off at any point here.
Yeah, man, this is a spot for me where, you know, I hate the price, right? I obviously think my style is not leaning towards taking big favorites, laying big chalk. It's just not the way I play the game. Everybody's got different strengths and weaknesses, but typically that's not how I do it, right? I either look for a plus money prop or plus money angle of some kind, or if I'm going to lay chalk, I do it very selectively. And in this case, I think there's enough like liability on Pratis in terms of his style to not want to go lay the chalk with him. However, I think that Trevin Giles is like very disrespected by the UFC like betting community because his chin isn't great, but like skill for skill, he's very good. He's good at jiu-jitsu. He can box a little bit. His defense, obviously, his chin's up in the air. Sometimes he gets clipped. But when you look at his offense, he can go touch guys. He can go land big shots on guys. He just doesn't stick it to them, right? Like he leaves them around too long. He lets people hang out. He lands the big shots and then watches his work a little bit. So he just makes these mistakes that are, critical in cage fighting, especially at a big weight class. You make one mistake, you lose focus for a second, you lose the fight. And that's been his problem. But you look at Pratis, he's also made a career of that, right? Where it's like round 2 and round 3, he starts to figure out where you're going. He starts to figure out your reads and he starts to pick people apart. And I'm thinking about this fight saying like, I think that Radke has had some success so far against Urbina, who's not a very proven guy at this level, right? Very, very much struggled at this level. And then I also think Blood Diamond, I mean, he's like proven to not be at this level. And then he's, I believe, struggled on the regional scene since he went back. So we wish him luck. We hope he can get back on track. But we're just looking at the results saying maybe Radke's kind of been given some great opportunities. And you could say the same in terms of Officer Trevin Giles, maybe catching him at the right time, a talented fighter, but catching him at the right time. And then Mitch Ramirez, a guy who's in between weight classes and trying to figure out what he's doing next. So I think that Pratis has question marks, but it just feels to me like Radke has been a little bit too vocal, said a little bit too much. And I think they're giving him a hard matchup here. where he's going to be tested. And I think he could have success with his grappling. I think he'd be wise to try and take it there, but I did not like his wrestling that I've seen on the tape, broadly speaking, and his reaction to getting hit to the body, which I think he's going to get hit to the body here. I think Mitch Ramirez, eventually went down to a punch, but I believe he was hurt very badly from the body kick that came prior to that. And Prates is just a very long, awkward guy. And speaking of, we're going from a 9-inch reach advantage where the guy's a plus 5XX underdog to 6-inch reach advantage and the guy's minus 225 favorite here with Carlos Prates. And I think that, the grappling is certainly competitive here. So not like a runaway favorite for Prates. I do think he could get, wrestled here to a gross, cage push split decision. But if this fight takes place at space and it is a big cage, I think that it's just going to be Prates finding the better shots, picking the better shots on the feet, and I think he'll be a little more effective. But we've also seen he takes risks, right? He puts his hands down, fires a lot, and that leads to great offense and cool highlight finishes. But also it leads to Radke, yelling racial slurs and dropping people. No, yeah, I'm kidding. I don't think racial, right? Just didn't like the people that he saw as homosexuals in the crowd in Australia. So he let them know that he let them know he wasn't a fan and didn't appreciate them. But I think that Radke is a guy that, has run off his mouth a little bit and maybe bit off a little more than he could chew. But let's find out, man. He's only had 12 professional fights. And, I think that's the difference maker here. Prates, he's had a lot of professional experience, a lot of it against pretty decent competition as well. So I just think he's a little more ready for the moment. Shout out to my guy Wizz here. We got next up, brother, Thiago Moises taking on Ludovic Klein. And this one is going down in the 155-pound division. I think Ludovic Klein is one of the guys I get told that I look like in the UFC. So I'm rooting for my doppelgang brother here. But he's got his hands full, man. Thiago Moises fought the cream of the crop in the division. He's the underdog here. How do you feel about this one, Wiz?
This is a very close fight, in my opinion. I've always been a fan of Thiago Moises. His grappling is next level. He's a legit black belt. We've seen him submit multiple people with that rear naked choke. And man, I just think his one flaw is every time he goes up against someone who is too physical, he's someone that tends to show that he wilts. And we saw that against Benoit Saint Denis most recently, he himself is another like physical specimen. But we're looking at a guy here with Ludovic Klein. A lot of people think he's on the juice, and now that USADA's gone, he could be on even more juice. This guy comes in shredded to the bone, massive, guns blazing, and carries power for all 3 rounds. Decent cardio, tends to wilt towards the end of that 3rd round, similar to his last one where he almost got finished, but not the AJ Cunningham, the one before that. And I think this is a fight where if he imposes his physicality on Thiago Moises, I don't see how he can't find himself winning a 29-28 close decision. But this is another one of those fights where I could see it hitting the cards and hitting a split. Because in the 1st round, I think Thiago Moises might be able to have his way with the jiu-jitsu. His cardio has always held up, but as the fight goes on and where I expect the fight to go, which is Klein mauling him kind of and using his physicality, I think his gas tank is going to start to feel it moving into that 3rd. So for me, it's Klein or pass, but I'm ultimately passing. But it's going to be a fun fight to watch. I don't have too much thoughts on this one, though.
This is a fight where I like Ludovic Klein, and I think his game is impressive. I bet him a few times as an underdog before. I think he was plus 172 against Devontae Smith, and Devontae Smith is like pretty limited power puncher, tends to gas out a little bit over the course of 15 minutes. So for me, that was a great spot and a great opportunity. I have multiple units there on Ludovic Klein, but I faded him with Mike Trezano and Shane Young. Obviously the Shane Young one, he got splattered in the 1st round. That was such a bad bet. I falsely remembered that I bet the other side. I was like, everybody knew he was going to head kick him, but no, at the time I didn't. And Mike Trezano, I kind of got lucky there, right? We could just look back at the results and say, he's a New York guy. Maybe I got the best of the number, but I don't know that he should have won that fight. It was a very close fight. It could have went either way. I thought he maybe in the damage over control era of the UFC probably won that one. I thought he did more effective work on the feet. So the one thing about this fight is like if it stays on the feet, I don't like this fight for Thiago Moises for some of the reasons that you mentioned, the physicality, insane physique. And then you're looking at a guy in Ludovic Klein who's got head kick knockouts up the wazoo on his regional resume, right? It's not translated as much in the UFC, the finishing abilities, except for Shane Young when he got splattered there. But for me, I think my guy Nate, always sharp in the chat, says under 2.5. I was thinking fight not to go the distance. I just feel like both these guys have the tools to finish each other, where Klein hasn't really been materializing these knockouts, but that's the way you beat Thiago Moises, right? You got to beat the will out of him a little bit. And honestly, man, I bet Benoit Saint-Denis, and for the exact reasons that the fight played out, right? Like I basically said, like, he's just too tough. He's too durable. He's going to wear this guy down. He's going to get in his face. He's going to take him down over and over. But you need to like really make it a war with Thiago Moises early. And what happened is we saw a guy who's huge in Joel Alvarez just walk him down, bang, elbows, gave him the kitchen sink, and just never let him get off first base. But then you also see, where Benoit Saint-Denis, he faced a lot of adversity in that fight. He got taken down. Thiago Moises was landing good shots too. It was just one guy had more stinging power, better durability, and the willingness to just say, I don't care. Like, you could hurt me. You could break my face. I'm going to kill you. That's what you got with Benoit Saint-Denis. I was like, give me the soldier against Thiago Moises. He will win. But when you see Ludovic Klein kind of get pace grappled by Nate Landwehr, you do have to say to yourself, like, like maybe he's corrected all those problems. Maybe he's fixed that. But like, if you put a gi on right now with Nate Landwehr and Thiago Moises, that's going to end really poorly, for Nate. So I think that Thiago Moises, he's not at ATT, right? And honestly, I think that might be better for him because whatever was going on at ATT, I didn't feel like he was confident. I'm sure he's probably a little bit lower on the rung. They've got a ridiculous room of lightweights, right? So I think that he got some good work with Grant Dawson. He had some good relationships and stuff, but overall, training at Fighting Nerds, I feel like that's fine for him. And what I liked about his last fight is, dude, he was confident for once in his career. He just came out, he's like, dude, I'm going to embarrass you. Like, you're not on my level. I'm going to beat you up. I'm going to kick you in the calf until you quit. And beat him up, right? I don't think he's going to do any of that to Ludovic Klein, and he would be foolish to try. But what I think he could do is, I'm going to shoot takedowns. I'm going to like calf kick this guy, move away from him, make him frustrated, make him chase me a little bit. And as soon as he does, head in the chest, I'm going to double leg him. And I don't like this guy's reactions off his back. I mean, Jai Herbert was having some success just holding him down. That was granted late in the fight, but that's what interrupted this winning streak for him, right? He's on a nice 4-fight winning streak. But when you kind of look in the in-between there, Jai Herbert's having some competitive minutes. He's a big guy. You give him that credit. Mike Trezano, another big guy. So maybe those are a couple of things. He struggles with that size. But for me, it's just like, has he proven he could beat a grappler of this quality, of this ilk? I don't know. And we've seen Thiago Moises can go out there and have a bad round, right? He got 10-8'd, I would say, by Michael Johnson in round 1. It was a criminal assault. Bing, bing, just like had no answer for the jab, just getting plastered. And then he came out in round 2, and it wasn't like a traditional guard pull, right? Traditional guard pullers, get him out of my face, can't do it. Just as a wrestler in my heart, I don't mind it in the dojo. You have limited space, whatever, but just like, you're competing, you're scrapping, go for the takedown, man. And when you're seeing this guy, Thiago Moises, he gets in on a nice single leg, and then he falls back to a straight ankle lock, my man. I know that Michael Johnson loves to get submitted. But truthfully, bro, Thiago Moises like the only guy to land a straight ankle like submission in the UFC, and I don't know how long. Like, this guy actually has really quality jiu-jitsu when he falls back on it. Mel Costa, he didn't get it under the chin, right? He just squeezed his face until the guy's eyes were about to pop out of his head. Like, the guy's got a very good squeeze, and he's really understanding the jiu-jitsu. So for me, like, clear path to both guys finishing, right? In the early going, Ludovic Klein, if he's smart, he's going to come out here and try and elbow this guy 50 times. He's going to try and just get the ref to intervene early, because if you come at him fast, sometimes he just does this and just stells up, but like he saw, deer in headlights, like he just can't get off the starting block. But if you just let him like develop into a pace, people forget. I bet him plus 199 against Alexander Hernandez, and he gave him a tour of the octagon with his jab, just boxed him up at distance for 15 straight minutes. So he's been around for a long time. He's fought the upper echelon of the division more often than not. And when he's had matchups where it's like other guys that are like on his level or a little bit below, he's normally dispatching of them, getting him out of there. So for me, the fact he was picking with Benoit Saint Denis, and now he's like in a very similar price range here, it's just like, whoa, like, is Ludovic Klein Benoit Saint Denis? Maybe he is, but for me, Benoit is much more proven on the mat. I knew he was going to be competitive with Thiago on the mat. Maybe Ludovic can do that here, but I almost need to see it to believe it. I feel like Mason Jones kind of psyched himself out of that fight and didn't really show the best of himself, and was getting barnstormed on the feet a little bit before the grappling ever got going. I think he got out physical there. Maybe, again, that could happen to Thiago, but for me, I just think Klein by KO, Moises by sub, fight not to go the distance. That's how I feel about it. And Devin says, people are breaking this fight down like Moises is diving for ankles or he's useless. He's a good striker, not the better striker, but he's not bad. I agree. I think that for his like health and safety, right, you just don't want to be on the feet with Klein any longer than you have to be, in my view, because that high kick is dangerous, right? He can just take people out. He's also got power in his hands. But if you make the guy swing and miss, or if you take him down, I think you could tire him out. So for me, that is, that is something I'm definitely like considering as an underdog play. I like Thiago Moises. I think he's a good fighter, and I like the confidence I saw from him last time out. But I don't want to get caught on fool's gold, right? Because it was a pretty easy setup fight for him there. He was a big favorite, but I've had a pretty decent beat on him throughout his career. I think the only time I looked like a fool was when I thought he was going to beat Joel Alvarez. But in my opinion, that was the first time he looked like a flake under pressure like that, and he was a minus 225 favorite. It's a lesson about chalk for everybody out there. That's one of the ones I learned the hard way. But in any case, my man, we can move to this next one where Punahele Soriano is taking on Miguel Baeza. How do you feel about this one, Wizz?
Man, this fight is interesting. I think it finishes one way or another, but we look at a guy like Miguel Baeza, who has not been in the octagon for over 2 years, and you look at the record. Came into the UFC, and we all thought that he was starting to get fast track towards the title, and he was going to be this next big thing. Beat Matt Brown, Takashi Sato, but then you see the last 3 fights, 3 losses. First one, man, let's talk about this. So first one against Ponzinibbio, he is winning this fight through and through. 3rd round comes around, and then I don't know what happens. Yeah, Ponzinibbio takes over and wins the decision there. No shame. This is when Ponzinibbio was still, this 4 years ago, before we all thought that Ponzinibbio was washed, before we thought that he cannot fight anymore.
Still the dagger at that point.
Yeah. Then next fight, Chaos Williams got knocked out. No shame there. Chaos Williams can knock anyone out. We've seen time and time again. But the one that really is a big question mark here is the Andre Fiallo fight. And I bet you every single person that broke down this fight brought up the Andre Fiallo fight, who at the time, Fiallo was like the new shiny toy for the UFC, where he was going out there and knocking people out and having close competitive fights with Michel Pereira. And then here he goes. He beats a up-and-coming prospect we once thought in Miguel Baeza. And we started to see that Fiallo is not who we thought he was. He's not the fighter that we thought he had the potential to be in. 5 straight knockout losses for him. Then you look at the Puna Soriano side, and it's just been a disappointment for him ever since he got into the UFC. Never really got his ground, and nothing until the last fight where he lost to Dustin Stoltzfus, which seemed like he only had 3 minutes of gas and kind of just faded completely. Didn't know what happened to his gas tank. Was looking really good in the first round. Hurt Dustin Stoltzfus on multiple occasions, but never really stepped on the gas and went after that finish, which raised a lot of question marks for me in terms of A, where's this guy's head at? B, is he in the right weight class, which he's moving down to 170. Let's see how it fares for him, but still first time at 170. We don't know what to expect. And another thing worth mentioning about the gas tank is if you're moving down in weight and your gas tank was already bad at 185, it could get either really, really better or way worse for you moving down 10 pounds or 15 pounds in this case. So I don't know what to expect on the Soriano side. I think the only way I really can play this is either violence, fight doesn't go. I know that's probably juiced like crazy, or a Soriano finish just to go contrarian. Because I still think Soriano can knock anyone out in the first round, but after the first round is where you really start to see him wilt. For me, I think Baeza wins this fight at a high clip. I don't know if I'm going to be backing him at -190 to -200. And Baeza is just going to be the much larger fighter in this matchup. So give me Baeza. I think he wins by submission here. He's been competing in a lot of submission tournaments, a lot of jiu-jitsu and grappling stuff lately. So I'm going to take Baeza, but no bet as of yet.
Yeah, this is another tricky one for me. Both guys, like you mentioned, been disappointing lately in the UFC. And, no skin off their nose. They're fighting tough guys. But when you look at Punahele Soriano, the disappointment was the lack of, effort, intensity, physicality, cardio, whatever you want to call it, in that Dustin Stoltzfus fight. It really left a lot to be desired. And I think that when you're looking at a guy like Punahele, the fight against Roman Kopylov, I can forgive in terms of, Kopylov is obviously quality, right? He just went out there and beat a very seasoned kickboxer. Now that he lost the fight, everybody wants to talk about Cesar Almeida like he's a bum or something. Like, no, he literally fought for the kickboxing, or he fought the kickboxing world champion, the #1 middleweight in the world multiple times as recently as 2023. It's like, just get that shit out of my face. But Roman Kopylov proved in that fight, #1, he could compete on the feet. He hurt him early. But #2, he had the ability to mix in the wrestling. He's not incompetent there. So his ability to improve in the wrestling, stuff takedowns, that helped him against Punahele Soriano, who just was out of options, right? On the feet, he's more basic. He's more predictable. The guy's getting a good read on him. He's way bigger. He's longer. He can hit him from way further away. And he's stuffing all your takedowns. It's like, all right, yeah, it's going to be a tough night at the office for me. And I listened to Punahele's interviews, my man, and I did like what I heard from him, right? Because he's like, I'm in the gym and I'm getting beat up by 185ers who are the best in the world. And he's like, and then I'm going out to these fights and I know I'm the way smaller guy. And I'm worried about, using my physicality against these guys because I know it's going to drain me physically. And I can just tell you guys one thing from my life of competing in wrestling, which has, little bearing on mixed martial arts, but I just bring it up as an example. When I would compete at 160, I weighed about $157. The weigh-in limit is 162, right? So I was competing against some guys that were like cutting down, and I wasn't really doing that. I was just like naturally weighing in at the weight class and just showing up, happy to be there, right? And that made a difference for me. It allowed me to compete and do these things. But also, when I tried to move these guys around, when I tried to do the same style I always had done and be super physical and pull them around and grab, I'd be freaking drunk in the 4-minute mark. I'd be stumbling around, huffing and puffing for air because trying to move around these big guys is exhausting. So what you need to do is you got to pick your spots. You got to, choose where you go and explode in these things. But Puna is all go all the time. And when you do that, you're going to gas out. So I just thought that, #1, he was going in there and admitting, like, I had no confidence. I didn't feel like I was big enough to fight these guys. And that's going to be hard to go out there and win. And he's fighting quality guys. Like, Kopylov's not a bad fighter. So then I'm like, all right, this guy, now he's coming down to a weight class where he probably should be. I feel like it's fresh start where you evaluate him now moving forward as a welterweight, right? See if this is the change that he really needed. But if it's more of the same and he's gassing out in 6.5 minutes, it's like, okay, maybe this career is just not for him. He doesn't have the physical, everybody's got a different VO2 max, right? Maybe this guy just, when I'm doing it at my best and, trying my hardest, I only have 6 minutes of gas unless I can knock you out. That's it. But what do we know about weight cutting just in general? You got to be disciplined, right? If I'm naturally 190 pounds and I'm fighting at 185, you and I know we could go lose 5 pounds in a workout. You just, stay in a little bit longer, maybe don't have any water for that session and you just let it sweat out of you. You get a good sweat going, you keep it going. You could lose 5 pounds in an hour and a half, 2 hours. It's really not that hard. So it's like for Puna, he's basically admitting, like, I'm not cutting weight. I'm not dieting properly or anything for these fights. I'm just like doing my thing. Now to get to 170, he said I did a test cut. That just shows me a little bit more commitment. Like, hey, can I make this weight? Can I make it comfortably? He did it. Now he's like, all right, I can take fights at this weight. I can feel good. I can make the turnaround. He showed up on the scale. You pointed it out, man. Baez is going to be bigger than him anyway, right? He's at welterweight. He's still going to be the smaller guy. So it's like he needed this. He was fighting guys that were guaranteed to be bigger than him every time out. And so I don't know if oh, goodness gracious. I don't know if he's going to be I don't know if he's going to be a guy that you can rely on, right? I certainly wouldn't lay any favorite kind of price with Punahele Soriano, but I do think he's a guy that, needs this win, right? I do think he's got some pride. He's an Eric Nixick product, and Eric Nixick has like worked closely with him, wants to see him succeed. I don't think he would tell him go down to welterweight if he thought it was a hopeless endeavor and he was just going to get the same result. So I think he's trying to say like, hey kid, you got talent, but let's get in the right weight class and let's get serious about our career and let's make some of the right decisions. So I haven't seen it yet in terms of the improvements to go out there and back him. And it's not over 2-1 or something like that. I do think you're spot on the money in terms of the pure grappling. If Dustin Stoltzfus can submit you, I think Miguel Baeza can submit you. So obviously a good plus money way to target the Baeza side, looking at that sub angle. But for me, I think what's a little short here is Baeza by KO. Puna's a tough bastard, man. Kopylov had to hurt him very badly to the body. If you remember, Brendan Allen, this is when I learned that Punahele wasn't who I thought he was. Because I just thought to myself, like, this guy has the physicality, the athleticism, the background, Wartburg College. Like, I'm a D3 guy. I know. I got my Baldwin Wallace hat on, okay? They're the number 9 or even higher than that. Since I've left, they keep getting better and better. But when you're looking at these guys, they're a great wrestling school, right? Wartburg, Augsburg, the Bergs dominate in D3 wrestling. We're back at it. But when I'm looking at this, my man, Punahele, like he looked like he was going to be all that until he was picking with Brendan Allen and he got assaulted. And it was just body kicks. Brendan Allen like realized, I don't need to grapple with this kid. I don't need to like throw hands with him. I'm going to kick him in the body, move, kick him in the body and move. So I'm just like, when I'm looking, at this matchup, I'm like, Punahele has power, hands, aggression for the first 5.5, 7 minutes. I don't like that for Baeza just as like a comeback. He's been out for a long time. Like you said, he's been doing grappling matches. He'd be wise, I think, to try and wrestle and grapple here. But now we might see a little bit of sprawl and brawl from Puna. I think people forget he hurt his knee. I'm like 99% sure in the Maximov fight pretty early. Like Maximov went to take him down. He like based out and like kind of blew his knee and still competed really hard. Honestly, I would have given that fight to Puna. Maximov was just sniffing his crotch for most of the fight. Trying to take him down. I say this as a wrestler, it's a fight, right? We're not here to wrestle. If you want to go for a takedown, get a takedown, get on top, do something effective for fighting with it, like try and submit them or try and beat them up. But it just felt like Maximov was trying to wrestle all night and Puna was trying to get into a cage fight and had little success because he blew out his knee. So he just didn't have very much to offer. But the Brendan Allen fight, you saw the toughness on display. Dude, he was just getting ripped with body kick after body kick after body kick, and he just kept taking him. And I was honestly stunned. By the end of it, I couldn't believe what I was watching. So for me, I don't want to just say like this kid is going to quit and give up anytime he faces adversity. He's cutting weight, doing the right things. I think that if Baeza wins, it's by submission more often than not. And I think that for Punahele, he's a live underdog here. So I don't know if I'm going to get to the window. I doubt it unless it goes over 2-1. But because he is limited on cardio from what we know. And ABCs say always bet on cardio. But I don't think Baeza is like, lights out cardio coming off a 2-year layoff. I think that's a little bit of an unpredictable thing. He pulled out of several bouts due to injuries. I'm just looking at like, again, career trajectory. These are both guys that need a win desperately, but I'm not liking what I see from either guy. And one guy's a big chalked out favorite. How about you, Wizz?
Yeah. I already broke this one down.
My brother, even better. You were the one that brought up this.
I agree.
Great angle.
I agree.
I think that for Puna, the way I would play it is like the 3-1 KO. For Baeza, you're getting over 3-1 on the sub. A couple of different ways to look at it from a prop perspective. Next up, my man, Julian the Cuban Missile Crisis Marquez is taking on Zach Reese. I think that last time out when Zach Reese was fighting, I was like, why would I lay minus 225 on Zach Reese when I could take the under at like minus 170? And it's like, that's going to cover most of Brundage's win equity in his fights, right? He goes out there, bonks people or gets disqualified. Somebody gets disqualified in the first round. Other than that, things typically start to go sideways for him. And, his fights have been highly correlated to the under. Zach Reese, all of his fights are the under, right? Just historically throughout his career, not as many betting opportunities, but he's typically just having fights that are like taking place in 2.5 minutes, right? Like everybody runs out there, strikes are thrown, somebody falls over, somebody goes for an armbar, crazy fights. So I do think he's got offensive potential, right? When you just look at like the measurables in this fight, he's the bigger guy, he's the longer guy, he's the younger guy, a little bit fresher from a fight perspective, but I don't see enough to believe in him here. I thought that the Brundage loss was not a great look. I thought that the Eli Aronov fight was a little bit of he was fortunate. His opponent made some bad mistakes there. I honestly think in a rerun, Eli Aronov could win that fight. I don't think he had to wrestle at all. I think he could have just kept it standing and won the fight. But in any case, took it down, made a mistake, got submitted. So I think that Reese has a nice armbar. He's got a good series, but we also saw it was the same night as Selecki, right? They both were like, let me just go for the armbar and not like give myself a base or an anchor. It's mixed martial arts, buddy. People can get slammed on that dome piece. So the number one rule of fighting, protect yourself at all times. And I think that this is a fight where you've got, Julian Marquez, who is his durability is waning a little bit, but it's one thing to have your durability wane against like real, proven, credible UFC level guys like Marc-Andre Barrio, who pushes an insane pace over the course of the fight and just throws strike after strike after strike, or a guy like RoboCop, who could put people down bad. Zach Reese getting slammed by Cody Brundage and having, an ugly fight with Eli Aronov, who most people have never heard of. So for me, those are a couple problems on the Reese side. It's a very closely lined fight. I can't really lay chalk with a guy like Julian Marquez, but I think either guy's live to win by submission, which is rare for a middleweight fight. I think Marquez is the better grappler, but I think Reese has one shiny move that does work, right? He's very good with that armbar, seemingly. And he also has a couple different wins, but I think that's his primary go-to. He's going to attack that. Although maybe after that last result, he's going to have a little bit more hesitancy. But for me, it's just a fight that's highly volatile. I do think it ends under 1.5, but the price I thought was a little suspicious. How about you, my man?
Yeah, I actually have a more pat take this one. I think Julian Marquez is gonna finish Zach Reese. We don't expect this to finish, but yeah, I think Marquez is gonna land a knockout against Zach Reese here. We saw in Zach Reese's last two fights get pretty fortunate in terms of the outcomes. I know last got slam knockout by Cody Brundage. Even up to that sequence, I think he was getting pretty fortunate and missing a lot of these heavier shots. And then against Aronov, that's one of the biggest ass pulls I've ever seen in my life, that armbar. And I was on Zach Reese. I remember I was in New York. I was visiting New York with my buddy Couch Warrior as well. We're watching this fight and we're like, what just happened? Like, we're happy that we cashed the bet, but also at the same time, not the brightest of spots now looking back at it. And Marquez, if we know one thing about him, he's a dog. And what he was doing to Marc-Andre in the first round of the fight was pretty alarming. As someone who had a Marc-Andre ticket, I was pretty certain he was going to get the stoppage victory there. And luckily we didn't have Herb Dean reffing that fight. So I was able to squeak away with it. But Marquez is like, he's always going to bring every single fight. And the one difference in this fight specifically is that Marquez is a pretty good submission grappler, and I don't think he's going to be able to. I don't think he'll get caught in that armbar. I think he'll be privy to it, and he'll be able to defend out of that position if it does get there. And on the feet, I think Marquez is going to be able to land the much more impactful shots. And even if he does get hit himself, he will have the better defense. And in a fight like this, whoever has the better defense tends to win the fight more often than not, just due to the way these guys tend to swing. So give me Julian Marquez, especially this -130 price tag. I think line should be closer to around -170, -180. The more experienced fighter, the more experienced UFC fighter in Julian Marquez. I think just his last two outcomes against some pretty good guys have made some people overlook him in this spot. So yeah, pretty confident. Give me Julian Marquez.
I think his friend and podcast co-host Kendra Lust is making the drive, or probably flying out, more likely, to Louisville for this fight as well. So big stakes for my guy Julian Marquez. He needs this dub like he needs oxygen. You know what I'm saying, brother?
Absolutely. No, he has to fly out the lady. He needs his job. Unreal. Like, now that I think of it, this could be a win or go home type of fight for Marquez. Two fights.
I mean, it could be for both guys too. Reese obviously probably got signed to a 4-fight deal, but if he gets cleaned up twice, they might just say, "Hey, let's go work on that craft on the regional scene a little bit, and we'll sign you back in a couple of years if things work out." But my man, next up, we're gonna turn to the show notes for just 1 second. Yeah. Oh, go
I
ahead,
was
brother.
gonna, I was gonna mention, I have to get going. I had some prior plans, but let's go ahead
Hell
and
yeah,
do this
brother.
again next week. Let's repeat this next week. It was a lot of fun, and I was glad I was able to make the last minute replacement and guest spot here. It was really fun, and I appreciate the invite.
Hell yeah, brother. Thanks for making the walk. We appreciate you, dog. Have a great rest
Much
of the
love.
evening. Be well.
To everyone tomorrow, good luck, Liam. Good luck on your bets, and let's win some money.
Hell yeah. We have no other option. Let's go. Cheers, brother. Be well. All right, guys. There you have it. Great guest. Appreciate Wizz making the time. And I wanted to just kick it over to the show notes real quick and just say, guys, if you don't mind, drop a like on the video if you're watching along on YouTube. If you're not watching on YouTube, no problem. But make sure you get subscribed to the channel. Put out a lot of great fight content. Been clipping the show up a little bit as well. Timestamps, trying to make it easy for you guys to consume whatever you want to. If you want to just check out one breakdown, awesome. If you want to check out the whole show, I do have some long breakdowns sometimes, but today for Bets and Banter, we're trying to be a little bit more brief, just get right to the heart of the matter. No 2 hours and 40 minutes like we did on First Look. First Look is when we tend to be a little bit more long-winded. We talk through the fights, we think through them. I've done a lot of my thinking by this point in the week, so I'm excited to just break down these fights, give you my thoughts, and kick it from there. If you guys have questions, comments, concerns, please fire those off down in the comment section below. And without further ado, we're back at it. We've got Bruno Ferreira taking on Dustin Stoltzfus. And these are fights that I've already written up for my friends at Roto Grinder. So I have, pretty ironed out opinions on these ones. I do think that they are, tricky fight. So let's get into him, right? First of all, Bruno Ferreira, he's going to be my pick in this fight. I think he's going to win. I do think Dustin Stoltzfus, a talented guy, a guy who's gone out there, fought pretty quality fighters in the UFC, but he got cleaned up in less than a minute by Abus Magomedov, kicked in the face. Obviously not a great look there. Then you look at some of his other footage in the UFC. He was winning against Gerald Meerschaert, having some uncomfortable, but winning the striking exchanges with Meerschaert on the feet. He gassed out. He gave up bad positions. He got finished late in that fight. And Gerald Meerschaert was like minus 225 there. And it was so funny because I had said, like, this is one of the fights where, like, Gerald is not going to look minus 225, but, like, I feel like he's going to come back and win it in round 3 at a pretty high clip. And that was exactly what happened. You look at Adolfo Vieira. He's a guy who's got sensational jiu-jitsu, but his problem in the UFC has been an inability at times to mix the martial arts, to get to his takedowns, to get on top of people. And when he does, he tends to put them in really vulnerable situations, right? We've seen him, hit a very athletic back take on Dustin Stoltzfus where he like wraps around him, pulls himself all the way in from the front to the back. It was just unbelievable. Loved what I saw there from Adolfo. And you look at this fight, and I think that Bruno Ferreira is a very dangerous fighter. A lot of the fights we've seen from him so far in the UFC have been stand-up heavy, but that last time out against Phil Hawes, we saw the judo, we saw the wrestling, we saw the jiu-jitsu, and we saw his ability to get takedowns, get control, use his throws, and also land on the feet. Right, he's got knockout power. We've seen that multiple times. It would be one thing if he just knocked out Phil Hawes, who's a guy who's known for having some chin concerns, right? Gregory RoboCop Rodriguez has had some chin concerns in his career, but he's 6-2 in the UFC. He's got a sensational record, and one of his losses is to this guy, Bruno Ferreira, who flatlined him in the first round. And if you guys rewatch that, he showed some subtlety to his striking. He was using his low kicks. He was, evading with his footwork, trying to make his opponent come and chase him a little bit. And then along the fence line, he basically like rolls with the shot, faked like he was going to go left, faked like he was going to go right, and then hits the left hand so clean and just buried him with it. This guy's got power in both hands, in my opinion. And I think that Dustin Stoltzfus is a little bit hittable. I do think he's a very tough guy. I don't think he's easy to just land strikes on and get out of there. So I think that we're going to see him accumulate some damage. I think he's going to get beat up here. I do think he's going to get ragdolled a little bit physically. He's got the skills in terms of the credentials on paper. He's a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, but I think physically Stoltzfus is going to be outmatched here. So give me Bruno Ferreira to win by stoppage in the first round or the second round here. I think he's going to get the job done, and I wouldn't be surprised by either method of victory, right? A lot of people are favoring the knockout here. I understand why. He's got that, proverbial death touch, if you will. He hits people and they don't effing move, to quote Jeremy Stevens. But when I'm looking at his ground game, he's a black belt in judo. He's a black belt in Brazilian jiu-jitsu. And I think his ground game that I've seen so far in his career has been phenomenal. I'd say the only concern with playing a guy like Bruno is his cardio is not proven. He's killing guys in the first 2 rounds, with rapidity throughout his career. But I also don't want to hold that against him. So for me, I don't like the Dustin Stoltzfus side here. I do think that he would probably be the money line side from a long-term fundamental standpoint, but I can't get there. I think that this is going to be Bruno Ferreira inside the distance, probably in the first 2 rounds. That's the way I see this one going. Next up, guys, we've got Raul Rosas Jr. taking on Ricky Turcios. This is a great fight. It's a fight that's dividing the community. Raul Rosas is in that parlay buster territory, minus 225, minus 250. That's my concern with his side of the equation. However, I think that there is going to be a lot of underdog love, on Ricky Turcios this week. Ricky Turcios has good cardio. He has an ability to go out there and push a pace. He's been favored in some other UFC fights. I think people have that relationship with him from being on the Ultimate Fighter, from seeing his personality. He's a likable guy, easy guy to support and get behind. And when you see that plus money number by his name, I think that's going to intrigue a lot of people to click. On the other side, Raul Rosas Jr., the prodigy, the prospect, young kid, getting a lot of love, a lot of praise and credit. I think that people are still holding against him the fact that he couldn't finish Mando Gutierrez when he was 17. And they do want to, paint this with a broad brush. I think that there's a lot of ways that this fight could play out. But for me, the thing that separates a guy like Raul Rosas Jr., in my humble opinion, from a guy like Ricky Turcios is their level of intensity. You see a guy like Ricky Turcios compete, and I think he's often very loosey-goosey. He does go out there and look for his own attempts. He has, a ground game. He's not a slouch in any one position. But I felt like Amin Zahabi, who I bet against Ricky Turcios, I bet him plus 170. The line kept moving against him. I bet him again at plus 200. And Ricky Turcios closed a big favorite in that fight. And Amin Zahabi just drew a line in the sand all fight and basically said, you want to come over here, I'm going to kick you in the leg, I'm going to punch you in the face, I'm going to make your life hell, I'm going to find my shots and counter you. And Ricky kind of consigned to the fact, hey, this guy's stinging me with some shots. He's getting off the better looks right now. So I'm just going to stand over here and throw shadow boxing combinations, 15 yards away. And I say this with all love and respect, but I just didn't see him pushing the violence, trying to really get after Amin Zahabi and win that fight. I thought he kind of knew he was outgunned a little bit in terms of the skill, and he let that fight pass him by. He just let it slip away, and he threw a lot of useless volume. It's one of the rare times where volume meant nothing because he's just not in range to land these shots. If I throw 50 punches, but they're not within range to hit you, it's not really going to do much for me on the scoring criteria. And I think that when you're looking at a guy like Raul Rosas Jr., I think he's much more likely to be in good positions throughout this fight. And I think his takedowns are better. I think his wrestling is superior. So I don't think that Ricky is going to be able to stop him from taking him down if that's what he chooses. And I think that if Raul comes out like he did in his last fight, where he's very aggressive, where he's looking to finish the fight with strikes, I would not be surprised if Raul Rosas Jr. is able to get this guy to the ground, roll his wrist, put him in bad situations, and beat him up really bad. Because if you have great positional control, you can really put a hurting on somebody. You can beat him up, and you can force the referee to intervene. Crucifix, back take, where you flatten him out from the back mount and just throw shots. Those are some of the easier ways to get fights stopped. And I just worry that, Turcios is going to come out here a little loosey-goosey, a little bit, haphazard, and just get steamrolled by a guy like Raul, who's young, hungry, and ready to go put pressure on this guy. Now, the way you play Ricky Turcios, in my humble opinion, is either you wait for the live entry after round one. You say to yourself, hey, let's see if this kid slows down. Let's see if this kid starts to make mistakes. The criticism of Raul Rosas Jr. is his cardio is not proven to be 100% over 3 rounds. But I would argue, guys, Christian Rodriguez has just proven to be a very difficult fight. A very difficult out for anybody. Isaac Delgarian brings crazy pressure, crazy intensity in the first round, was landing huge elbows, was looking for sub-attempt after sub-attempt. This guy, Christian Rodriguez, is very difficult to finish. We know that. So I'm looking at a guy who I respect in Ricky Turcios, but a guy I've typically been looking to get on the other side of, and I think that he's a deserved underdog in this spot, but I do think he can win. If he wins, I think he's going to have to come back late, but I think he's not a proven finisher at this level. And, he's going to competitive split decisions in his wins. So for me, I just haven't seen the margins from a guy like Turcios. I understand the dog shot, but personally can't get there. I think Raul Rosas Jr. is going to win this fight, and I think he's going to stop Ricky Turcios. Next up, guys, we've got Dominic Reyes and Dustin Jacoby. This is the pick I don't feel great about at all. In terms of Dominic Reyes, I think he's a better pedigree of fighter than Dustin Jacoby overall. I think that from a long-term market fundamentals point of view, Dominic Reyes would have to be the play for me or passing in this fight. And I'll explain to you guys why. I'm not saying that he's going to win the fight, right? I'm saying it's a very volatile light heavyweight fight. And you have a guy that has one time in his career, and Dominic Reyes closed as a bigger plus money underdog than he will this weekend. And that was against John Jones. And by the way, that's a fight where a lot of people thought he won the fight, right? So he was plus 3XX in that fight against John Jones. Every other time out in the UFC, guys, he's been favored except one, and that was against Yuri Prochazka. And if you guys watch that fight back, it was a highly competitive fight. I actually bet Dominic Reyes at the time, and you guys will say to me, oh, you square, you bet Dom Reyes against Yuri. I had 10 units on Yuri against Glover Teixeira. And also, guys, I had Jan Blachowicz plus 200 against Dominic Reyes. I thought that the line against Yuri was a slight overcorrection. I'm like, listen, Yuri's very talented. He is proven to go fight hard for your dollar, but is he really minus 130 against Dominic Reyes right now based on what we know? I thought Dominic Reyes had some opportunity to submit him, and I thought Dominic Reyes had some opportunity to knock him out. In that fight, if you listen to Yuri Prochazka's own interviews that he gave about it, he was knocked unconscious by an upkick in that fight. He basically was out on his feet at one point as well. He got put in a choke. He was in dangerous spots, and Dominic Reyes was unable to finish it, right? Yuri has proven to be one of the most difficult guys to finish. Alex Pereira was able to do it. Who else? It's like he is a very durable guy. I think Mo Lawal, way back on the regional scene, when Mo Lawal was at the peak of his powers, and Yuri ran that one back and got the dub. So I think that this is a guy in Dominic Reyes who got splattered by Ryan Spann, but Ryan Spann is a big power puncher for the early rounds. He comes out hot typically in his fights, and if the fight gets extended, that's when Ryan Spann starts to look terrible. But in the first round, Ryan Spann comes out and competes and normally has a competitive fight. He makes mistakes. He'll do really boneheaded things at times, but we've seen Ryan Spann could land and hurt a bunch of different guys in the first round throughout his UFC career. And also he submitted guys, right? He's got the guillotine choke. He's got an ability to compete in a couple different phases. So if you want to just blindly shoot takedowns and wrestle Spann, he will try and guillotine you. We know that. And then on top of that, on the feet, he's a powerful guy. So in that fight, Dominic Reyes is a minus 225 favorite at close. Right? He closed as a favorite. Everybody thought he was going to win that fight against Spann. He gets cleaned up there and he takes some time off. He's had some health concerns. Like there's definitely reasons to be skeptical of the Dom Reyes comeback story. But on the other side, let's talk about the opponent, right? Where Dustin Jacoby, he hasn't been on a sensational run. He's been on a very difficult run in his own career. He's much more durable on paper than a guy like Dominic Reyes. There's simply no denying that. He's not getting flatline KO'd in the same brutal way that we've seen happen to Dominic Reyes, unfortunately. But what we have seen is Alonzo Menefield hurt him bad on multiple occasions, right? That was his very last fight. Then Alonzo Menefield gets flattened in the first round in his next outing, kind of halting his momentum, right? You look at Kennedy Nzechukwu, he knocks him out in the first round. Hats off to him. Kennedy Nzechukwu's chin is like the thing that comes and goes with the wind. You never know when it's going to be there. You never know when Kennedy's going to go out there to fight hard for your dollar or go out there and just look into traffic and not really throw. Then the Azmat Mirzakhanov fight. I believe he was dropped in that fight as well, if my memory serves. Then you look at the Khalil Roundtree fight. Competitive split decision, but the bigger moments, the bigger shots landed, go to Khalil Roundtree Jr. Daun Jung, he knocked him out early there. Hats off to him. That was a great win. And again, that's the path when you're looking at how does he beat a guy like Reyes and look impressive and cover these lines. It's the KO one. It's the KO price for Jacoby. But he goes to a lot of competitive decisions over the course of his career. Split draw with Iwan Kutalaba, goes to decision with John Alon, a very average fighter, goes to decision with Michal Oleksiejczuk. Guys, I believe he's the only person to ever beat Michal Oleksiejczuk by decision. Let me confirm that that's true. Michal Oleksiejczuk is 4-1 career to the decision. His only decision loss is to Dustin Jacoby, right? He is eminently finishable, but he gets finished on the ground. He gets finished via submission. Dustin Jacoby is pretty one-note. He's a kickboxer. He likes to go out there and kickbox. He tries to sprawl and brawl and keep it upright in mixed martial arts. He can be taken down. He can be knocked down. Maxim Grishin back in the day almost finished him, hurt him so badly early in the fight. And I think that Dustin is a fine fighter, but he's 36 years of age. He's actually older than Dominic Reyes. He's never been in the top 10, top 5 type discussions, title challenger type discussions, like a guy like Dom Reyes has been. So maybe Dom is just like way too far past gone and it's all over for him. But if he wins this fight, I think Dom Reyes will be back to, pick 'em range in his next fight with whoever he fights towards the top of this division, especially if he looks good. And meanwhile, Dustin Jacoby, I don't think he's proven that he can cover these prices consistently. I believe he's 5-3 as a UFC favorite and has not turned a profit over that, course of iteration. So he's typically been overvalued relative to his performance. And I think that on the other side, Dominic Reyes, like I mentioned, he's only once ever been a dog of this size. So it's a greasy one. It's a gross one. And it could end, in tears for Dominic Reyes early. And we don't wish that on anybody, but it's the reality of the business. If your chin is gone, your chin is gone. But, he spent a lot of time out of the octagon and, he wants to come back. He wants to try and make a run at this. And I do think if you have to assign who's got the wrestling and grappling upside, I would put that on the Dominic Reyes side. He's a guy that all the way back in 2014 submitted Ozzy Diaz on the amateur circuit in California. As a professional, he's gotten submissions, including in the UFC. And Dustin Jacoby hasn't been tested much on the mat. So if I'm in Dom Reyes' corner, if I'm coaching him up, I'm like, bro, try and wrestle this guy. Let's not try and go blow for blow with this guy at distance. That being said, it's light heavyweight. So if anybody lands a big shot in the early going, Dustin Jacoby, who has been historically quite durable, but who's taken a metric ton of damage over the course of a long career, kickboxing matches, he has been knocked out in kickboxing several times before. He's been knocked out in MMA once before as well. I believe that was in the UFC back in the day. And overall, it was against Mo Lawal via ground and pound back in 2014. So both these guys been around for a long time fighting, and Dom Reyes is the younger guy who's had more credible, better experience. So for me, it's just hard to click that Jacoby side at a huge favorite indication based on Dom Reyes' chin being the elephant in the room. But tricky fight. Not saying it's an easy call. You got to pick somebody, and my gut is just saying Dominic Reyes is a live underdog here. So that's what I went with my article prediction. But I think I took him by split decision. Not one I feel great about. I just think that if there is no finish that materializes, it's probably going to mean that the fight played out really close with some striking, with some clinching and some wrestling mixed in. And I think that's a winnable fight for Dom Reyes. Last but not least, guys, we got the main event of the evening, and we've got Jared, the Killer Gorilla Cannonier. He is the smaller guy in terms of height here at 5'11". That was noticeable when these two guys faced off. You see that a guy like Imavov looked tall, confident. However, Jared Cannonier's bricked up. He comes in ready to compete. He is a scrappy guy. He put on a striking clinic in his last fight, landing a ton of shots, going to all levels of the body. He's a dangerous fighter, man. He's got a lot of power in his hands. He can throw powerful kicks as well. His calf kick is really effective in his fights. I think that's something he's going to try and look for in this fight. But for me, I did end up picking the Imavov side. I wouldn't advocate laying the chalk here. ABCs say always bet on cardio, and despite being 40 years of age, Jared Cannonier has had proven better cardio, but that's my problem, right? It's like we're relying on a guy who's 40 years of age, who's coming off a knee surgery, and he's been out of the octagon for a little while, and he's getting back in there against a guy, Nassourdine Imavov, who's young, who's hungry, who wants to be here, who's making improvements fight over fight. He's been accruing the relevant experience that he needed to, going 5 hard rounds with Roman Dolidze. And we've seen flashes from Imavov with the power, with the ability to get people on the ground and beat them up there, with the ability, to attempt some submissions as well. And I think that Jared Cannonier is a quality guy in all positions. However, I don't think we've seen his ground game tested very often in the UFC. I do think that his chin has been tested in his recent bouts, and he's answered the call. He's been hurt, rocked, wobbled, dropped, and he just finds a way to keep pushing in most of these fights. But at 40 years of age and coming off a surgery and coming off a layoff, it starts to just add up as factors that maybe could lead to him getting clipped a little bit on the chin. And I think Jared Cannonier is a tough guy, but Nassourdine Imavov should have a speed advantage as the younger, more spry athlete. I think both these guys can be fast with their delivery. I think Jared can be very impactful with his delivery. We saw that in terms of how Sean Strickland respected him, moved backwards, evaded his shots. But I also think that we've seen, guys can clip Jared Cannonier, whether it's Derek Brunson, who clipped him, whether it's Robert Whitaker, who clipped him on multiple occasions and broke his arm, I believe, with a kick in that fight. Whether that's the fight against Marvin Vettori, he kind of got buzzed a little bit in the opening frame there. And I just think that this is a guy who is always going to go out there and fight hard for your dollar. So you can't hate on the plus 105 underdog shot on the ABC, say always bet on cardio. But I do think it's probably for me a better opportunity to look at a fight, not to go the distance. And the reason I say that is, number one, middleweight fights have been going the distance at an insane clip recently, especially at this main event level. And I think that's what a lot of people are expecting here as well. But when I look into it, I just think to myself, number one, Jared Cannonier has stopping power. He can put out anybody. He can finish people. Nassourdine Imavov, he could do the same thing. The Russian sniper, I think he can put laser-like precision behind some of these shots. He can really find his range with the jab, dictate to people. And I think that he can also potentially mix in takedowns in this fight where he can be successful. So it's an interesting fight. It's not an easy fight to call by any means. I don't feel great about a side, but I think in the early going, Nassourdine Imavov should have opportunities to finish if he's having success with his strikes, if he's getting off. And if Jared Cannonier looks a little bit slower, a little bit a beat behind. And on the other side of things, if Jared Cannonier is able to pace this guy like he did Marvin Vettori and land that same number of strikes, I don't know that Nassourdine Imavov can stand up to that over 5 rounds, because I think fatigue would be a factor. And I do think that Jared Cannonier can brutalize the leg, can do certain things that make it hard to be mobile and get away. So I think that if it goes to the distance, I think we're looking at split decision type territory. I think both guys will have moments of success and land a lot of strikes. But I think that if this is a fight that ends early, it could go either way. I would just lean towards the Imavov side. So that's what ultimately made me pick him in this spot. But I respect Jared Gorilla Cannonier. I've bet him in the past for many units. So I really believe in what he brings to the table. But the older he gets, the more injuries add up, the more damage accrued over time adds up. Frankly, just the better the middleweights overall are starting to get a little bit in terms of the guys making their way up in the division from a contendership standpoint. I think Imavov has made some improvements over time as he's been in the UFC. And we saw just how much he was able to jump in his output from the Strickland fight to the fight that he had with Dolidze. So it's not an easy fight at all. But I do think Imavov's the bigger guy and the younger guy, fresher guy. So I think those things make me lean his side. DG says, talking about 303, what is your early prediction or thoughts for Gary and MVP? This is where I'll leave you guys today, because I do actually have to get back to some writing an article today. But I think DG raised an interesting question, so I want to address that before we get out of here. And any other questions, comments, concerns that you guys have, go ahead and throw them down in the comment section below. I'm happy to get to them, but I got an assignment that I have to write my article tonight. So I got to finish that next. But talking about 303, my prediction or thoughts for this Gary MVP fight, I will share with you guys something that stuck with me, which is I listened to Dan Hardy. I think this was even before the fight was booked, but he had said, Ian Gary would not want to go out there and strike with Michael Venom Page because, that wouldn't go well for him, basically. And these guys have trained together at Team Renegade for sure. And Dan Hardy is probably privy to that information. To how that went, right? He was probably there, probably saw those sparring sessions. And I think he kind of said it without saying it, that on the feet, he thinks MVP would win against Ian Gary. Where I think the intrigue factor comes with Ian Gary is I've always believed that he's kind of keeping his grappling as like his ace in the hole, right? Meaning I thought he could have submitted Neil Magny at any time he wanted to. I thought he was a much better grappler. I thought he was a better wrestler. I thought he was more physical. And he just chose to keep distance, batter the legs, beat up Neil Magny the whole fight. And then very late in the fight, he goes for the head and arm choke. And he basically got it right away. And I think he could have finished it with more time. So it just seemed to me like, he's kind of keeping this as like a secret weapon. And that's the way you beat MVP, I feel. Right. Kevin Holland had brief grappling success. He's not a very proactive grappler. He's not a guy that likes to go out there and push that and insist on that. But what do we know about Ian Gary? He doesn't care if people boo or cheer, right? He just wants to win fights and get to the belt. That's what he says. And I would not be surprised at all if Ian Gary goes out there and attempts takedowns against Michael Venom Page and gets them as well. So, yeah, man, it's a tricky one. I don't have the strongest thoughts, but I might make one more donation to the Ian Gary by Sub Foundation and just see how it goes. Shout out to Bo here. Who's your most confident pick on the card? That's not really how I roll, brother. I mostly look for underdog opportunities, typically speaking. But just scanning the card, the favorites that I think should win, I think Taylor Lapis is going to win. But I do think it's a close fight. I wouldn't advocate laying the money line price. I think Carlos Prates is going to win, but I wouldn't advocate laying the money line price. I think Julian Marquez is going to win, but I wouldn't advocate laying the money line price. I think Raul Rosas Jr. is going to win. I would not advocate laying the money line price. And I think Imavov is going to win, and I would not advocate laying the money line price. So I'm not extremely confident about anything. That's why I'm looking towards underdogs, Bo, but I just wanted to give you an answer to your question out of respect for the ask. So here's what I got to do, guys. I got to give you guys the final closing thoughts here. Number one, our show sponsor, Fight Numbers. If you guys watch on First Look, I walk people through like exactly where Fight Numbers is beneficial for me, right? I pull up the odds. I'm looking at the best available odds across the market. And for me, I'm always trying to get the best of it. I want to give one example of just looking at a fight market and telling you guys why price is so important. If you were to shop around right now, you can find somebody like Jesse Butler as low as plus 440, plus 430, right? If you're trying to win money in sports betting long term, you can't bet plus 430 when plus 520 is on the board, right? It's just going to be very hard to win the game like that when you're taking a systemic disadvantage. So you always want to line shop for the best available prices. Fight Numbers is a great tool for doing that in the mixed martial arts market and ecosystem. I use all the different tools out there, a lot of the free ones as well. Best Fight Odds, fightodds.io. All those are in my rotation. I use the free version of OddsJam. I use a lot of different tools, but Fight Numbers for me is a very effective tool, and they've got a lot to offer about MMA specifically. They also, a lot of people were asking before about fantasy, DraftKings, daily fantasy options. I won't ever lie to you guys and tell you I'm Johnny Sophisticato about those things, but there are guys that have won hundreds of thousands of dollars and they're on Fight Numbers. John Kelly is a fantastic DraftKings player. They've got a great team assembled as well. So if you're looking for betting information, they have that. If you're looking for odds and the best resources, they have that. If you're looking for, a great company, a great guy at the forefront, John Kelly is a guy I really respect and appreciate his work in the space, does free content every week, very sharp individual, and also a great guy in the community, service member. So just really respect him and what he does and his product. So Fight Numbers. You can use my promo code Liam. They will hook you up with 30% off for your first month subscription if that's the route you want to go. If not, no sweat. I appreciate the support nonetheless. If you guys want to support me, simple way to do it, drop a like on this video, get subscribed to the channel, show some love and support in the comments section. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, go ahead and fire them off down there. It is my birthday this weekend, guys, so I'll probably be a little bit off the radar for the next day or two, but then it's right back at it. We're coming back next week. There's more fights to talk about. There's always another great opportunity. So I hope you guys will all join us when we're back to talk about it. I hope you guys will click the bell for notifications as well. We go live at all different times, right? When it's me and Rich for a typical Thursday Bets and Banter, you know to expect us about 3 o'clock in the afternoon on Thursdays. However, when we got a different guest on, when we're mixing things up a little bit, my jiu-jitsu training, whatever I have going on in my personal life, I have to move things around sometimes. The way to never miss the show when we go live, hit that bell for notifications. Really appreciate it. And then the last thing I'll say is if you want access to my bets, my information, my write-ups, my fighter profiles, the resources I make on a weekly basis, the easiest way to support, that's on patreon.com/LiamPicksFights. It's again in the description box down below. No obligation ever to support, but if you enjoy what we do here and want to go that one step further and ask any questions anytime, day or night, that's what we do. And I post all my bets there first, but the content will always be here on YouTube as well. I truly appreciate the support. God bless each and every one of you guys. Good luck on all your bets. Wasn't a winning week for us last week, so knock on wood, we can start a new trend here. We can start a new winning week. We're up about 15 units on the year. so far. So hopefully we can keep the ball rolling. Positive energy, one episode, one at a time, and one bet, one breath, one experience at a time. God bless you all. Come back next time. We're having all the same fun again. Thanks, everybody.